concerned. Here's Congressman Jason Crow earlier today.
And there are hundreds of functions that occur at the Pentagon and at CIA headquarters every day to make sure that those troops are safe, from changing force protection postures to moving troops around, to moving assets around, to making sure that we're addressing daily intelligence threats. So instead of making sure that the right people are in place to perform those functions, he's getting rid of those people, and a lot of them at the same time, and replacing them with loyalists. So
Courtney, could these new officials jeopardize military operations and national security around the world? I mean, how concerned should we be there?
So, I mean, there's always the redundancy that we have here at the Pentagon, right, with the military officials. I would ask everyone to, take a step back. And Congressman Crow, he certainly knows these issues. He served in the military. He did 1 or 2 deployments to Afghanistan. I mean, he understands this and some of the really critical, important decisions that have to be made at the Pentagon. But the two of these people who actually are these Trump loyalists actually were already in other jobs at the Pentagon anyway, and in relatively influential ones. They've just been given more power in these last 2 months. The one that you really need to pay attention to, though, is Kash Patel. He is now the chief of staff to acting Secretary of Defense Chris Miller. And the reason I say that is because he has the access, the proximity to this new acting Secretary of Defense, but also the chief of staff is generally the most powerful person in the Pentagon. He will set the agenda for what Miller is working on every single day. In a lot of cases, the chief of staff determines who actually gets in to see or speak to the Secretary of Defense. So he can really set, if he has some agenda or policy items that he wants to push through during his short tenure at the Pentagon, Kash Patel is in a position to make some of those happen. Allison.
Courtney, there's also talk about how this reshuffling could impact the presidential transition here. What are the concerns specifically there?
So that's mainly surrounding the Insurrection Act, right? Mm-hmm. Is if there, before the election, defense officials who I spoke with, I was floored by how worried they were about protests in the street surrounding the election. And I mean, it was a level of concern that was actually jarring to me in advance of the election. And then even last week, we haven't seen that materialize. It's not outside the realm of possible. We have a president who has not conceded the election. According to some of the polling, we have a pretty high percentage of the population in this country who believes that some of the elections may have been fraudulent, even though there's no evidence to prove that. So it is still possible that there could be some sort of problem, civil unrest in the streets surrounding election issues. There also could be some kind of protests surrounding the president actually leaving the White House. If that's the case and the president decides he's going to bring in active duty troops to do something about it, that's where the concern comes in. Remember, over the summer, Secretary of Defense Mark Esper spoke out publicly against the president using the Insurrection Act in the aftermath of the George Floyd protests. I mean, that was really what sealed his fate with President Trump, too. He could never really recover from being seen as someone who spoke out against the president and his will. But General Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who's still at the Pentagon, he also spoke out against it, and a number of other senior officials made it very clear at the time they were against the use of active duty troops in the streets for any kind of protest-related issues. So while that is certainly still a concern, that's the only real plausible way that the military could be brought in any way in this election. They won't have a role in pulling, if the president refuses to leave the White House, they won't be the ones who go into the White House and drag him out. There really is a very narrow role there. And again, the president would have to be the one who would invoke that law that the military would even be used.
Courtney, a lot of moving parts at the Pentagon this week. Thank you so much.
You bet. Have a good night.
You too. Only 4 Senate Republicans have acknowledged President-elect Biden's win, but several senators have told NBC News President Trump's lawsuits should not stop this transition from happening. NBC News correspondent Garrett Haake has the latest from Capitol Hill.
Hey, Allison, just within the last 24 hours or so, we have started to see some of these, what I would call the governing wing of the Republican Party in the Senate, break away on the issue of the transition. Marco Rubio, Mitt Romney, Mike Rounds, Pat Toomey, all saying that while the president goes through the motions with his legal challenges to the election, that the transition process should get underway to protect continuity of government, make sure that if indeed Joe Biden is the president-elect, he is, that he gets in up to speed and able to do his job on day one. So we are seeing those small breaks, but we're also seeing the continued focus on Georgia. And I think this is the overwhelming issue. This is why these Republican senators aren't breaking with the president more forcefully. We now have 50 Republican seats in the Republican column, with North Carolina and Alaska being called in the last 24 hours. That means these 2 seats in Georgia coming up on that January 5 runoff are everything. Marco Rubio's down there campaigning today. His fellow Floridian, Rick Scott, has cut an ad on behalf of both Republican senators there. These Republicans need Donald Trump's voters, if not Donald Trump himself, to show up for them in Georgia on January 5th. And that's why you're not going to see them throw this president overboard, because they know he still controls those voters. They are getting a little bit of help from Vice President Mike Pence, who will be campaigning in Georgia on the 20th, but getting the man at the top down there and getting him to at least stay focused, wear his red jersey, and help them push Georgia over the finish line is, in their minds, job number 1 for these Republican senators. Allison?
A USPS whistleblower changing his story about ballot tampering in Pennsylvania. The House Oversight Committee tweeting that the postal worker completely recanted his claims after he was questioned by the USPS Inspector General. NBC News correspondent Jeff Bennett joining me now. Jeff, what else can you tell us about this investigation?
Hey, Allison. Well, this postal worker, whose, it turns out, false claim of ballot fraud, his claim was touted by Republicans as evidence of larger issues of fraud in Pennsylvania to back up President Trump's case, to include the head of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Senator Lindsey Graham. Well, this worker, who is in Erie, Pennsylvania, now admits, according to the U.S. Postal Service Inspector General, that it was all a lie. And so what that means is this is just another way of chipping away at this charade that President Trump is trying to push forward, suggesting that there is something other than legitimate votes that accounts for his loss, Allison.
Yeah, Jeff, I mean, the Trump campaign, some of Trump's Republican allies used these specific allegations as examples of voter fraud in the election. What does this do to Trump's legal battles in PA? I mean, it looks on the surface like it weakens them, but is there anything else specific that we can expect here?
Yeah. Well, it's not entirely clear how this specific instance is related to the overall Trump legal push.
Got it.
And to be clear, what this postal worker alleged was that the local postmaster general told him to backdate ballots that arrived after Election Day. That didn't sound, when he said it at the time, it didn't sound legit, and it turns out that he made it up entirely. Separate from that, what you have in Pennsylvania is the Pennsylvania Secretary of State asking the federal judge to throw out the lawsuit that the Trump campaign has put forward, where they're asking them to hold off on certifying the race. So those two things are kind of happening concurrently. Right now, those votes are still being counted. And as I stand here and speak to you, Joe Biden is leading Donald Trump by a margin of some 50,000 votes, and that's expected to grow. So there's no recount, there's no legal action that will overturn the apparent will of the voters in that state.
Jeff, we are hearing that there are concerns that legitimate issues could impact the Georgia Senate runoff. What can you tell us about what's going on in that state?
Yeah, here's the deal, and I happened upon this when I was doing some reporting about who Joe Biden might choose to replace the current Postmaster General, Louis DeJoy. And what I found out is that Joe Biden can't replace the Postmaster General, Louis DeJoy, that DeJoy serves at the pleasure of the Board of Governors, all of whom are Trump appointees. And the reason why that matters is because DeJoy has made clear that after the election, he's going to put back in place his delay-causing policy changes. So imagine, in January, this pandemic, as we know, based on health experts, is supposed to get more severe, and people will be relying on the mail even more, one would imagine, for this hotly contested Georgia Senate runoff. And you could have another return of these huge delays and service slowdowns at the Postal Service when people around the country, but more specifically in Georgia, are more dependent on on-time delivery than ever before. So it's a huge potential crisis that could play out. And then President Biden, or rather, he'd still be president-elect because that's before Inauguration Day, but he'd ultimately be able to do nothing about it when he does become president.
Wow, that is huge. And Jeff, I love how you politely say you happened upon this. I believe we officially call that really good reporting. Jeff Bennett, thank you so much.
Good to see you. Take care.
You too. Spanish language election disinformation is spreading in Florida. We know Facebook and YouTube have been getting rid of misinformation in English, but they're a little bit behind when it comes to other languages. NBC News reporter Carmen Cecine joins us now. Carmen, what kind of information are we talking about that's still out there, and how is it appearing on these social media platforms?
Well, in Spanish, it's all about the election results. So a lot of conspiracy theories about how there's widespread fraud, how Trump has been robbed of a victory. A lot of it echoes the same message that Trump has been giving, but a lot of it is also conspiracy theories like QAnon about the real ballots having a watermark, and that there are a lot of ballots out there that don't have the watermark. Or, for example, Sharpiegate. I have seen a lot of information in Spanish about ballots being filled in with a Sharpie and then not being read by the machine. So a lot of the information is similar to what's out there in English, but it's translated to Spanish, whether it's a recorded video or if it's someone just, typing out a description and then circulating it on Twitter or on Facebook posts or WhatsApp groups. Allison?
In your reporting, Carmen, you specifically focus on Florida. The president was leading with Latino voters in that state. So how is this affecting Spanish-speaking communities post-election?
Absolutely. He had a lot of support in Florida among Latinos, and these are the people who are circulating these false theories. So, for example, you have a large population here of Latinos who have left countries in this country. There was one man, a community leader, well-known, who recorded a video in Spanish calling on Trump to ask his supporters to go out and protest. And he said, quote, that he needs to destroy the communists in the Department of Elections. And this is truly what they believe. There have been protests going on outside restaurants, popular restaurants in South Florida. And, you do see this also in other states with large Latino populations. This has extended to people in New York and Texas. But Florida, you just see it more intensely here. And a lot of it also comes from Latin America and makes its way to Florida through friends, through family, through social media. Allison?
Carmen, are the tech companies taking these posts down or at least flagging some of the false claims within them?
Well, the experts that we spoke to are very alarmed because they believe this is not being taken down at a fast enough rate. They say that social media companies have taken down a lot of QAnon content in English, but they're just not doing it at the same speed in Spanish. My colleague April Glazer, who wrote the story with me, reached out to Facebook, to Twitter, to YouTube, and they all said that they have fact-checking teams that speak multiple languages and are flagging or taking down content. WhatsApp is a different story because of its closed nature, it's impossible to take anything down. And WhatsApp groups are very popular with Latinos in Florida. People create groups with 100, 200 people. And that's where you start getting a lot of information, misleading information, conspiracy theories circled around. Allison?
If you thought this misinformation was over now that we are post-election, it certainly is not. Carmen, thanks for getting us up to speed.
Sure.
Vice President-elect Kamala Harris is the first woman and the first woman of color ever elected vice president of the United States. Here's what women and girls across the country are saying about this historic election.
Especially seeing my fellow Howard grad, Kamala Harris, make it into the White House. I'm just overjoyed. I don't really know if I can put it into words if I did it right, but I'm freaking out.
I felt really happy because we had a powerful woman as our vice president, and she really showed that women can be just as powerful as men.
Women of color have been the backbone of this country for a very, very long time, and it feels good to actually have one of us in power because I feel like we do a lot of the groundwork. We are the ones who put people in office, the ones who hold up, who work, who do all these different things, and it feels really good to actually have one of us in office, sitting a black woman, an East Asian woman, all these different barriers that Kamala has broken, and that has just been a really empowering feeling tonight.
I think it's setting an example for, starting from, young kids to even young adults right now that just keep pursuing and keep pushing. I know a lot of people are probably like, she's a woman, she can't do it, but she's setting a great example.
I think that's important particularly because I have girls in my house. So I want to show them that leadership, that it is possible, that nothing is impossible if you strive to it.
I think that it is very inspiring because it shows other people, specifically people of color, that like it's possible.
You know, anytime we can show our children themselves anywhere in leadership in our government, it gives them an idea of what they can become, and being able to see someone who looks like her, who looks like him, is going to really help them and help other children to know how far they can go in this world.
I was talking to my mom last night about, how she's feeling about the election, and my fiance is black and I'm Indian, and so my mom was like, watching Kamala rise to the VP seat feels like she's watching one of her grandchildren entering the White House.
It's a great feeling to know that a woman has reached that point in our government. I think it'll do a lot for girls and women everywhere.
I think it's very empowering, and I'm very happy. So it's actually a vice president, not just a first lady or something like that. I'm hoping that in the future there will be a black woman as president, not vice president, not first lady, just president.
I felt like seeing her, I was like, oh, well, if she can do it, then I can do it.
A real close-knit group of nurses who pulled together when their boss needed help battling coronavirus.
You're not just any patient, you're their friend.
These folks saved my life. Thank God that there are people who want to run towards a pandemic as opposed to running away from a pandemic.
Close-knit group of nurses who pulled together when their boss needed help battling coronavirus.
You're not just any patient, you're their friend.
These folks saved my life. Thank God that there are people who want to run towards a pandemic as opposed to running away from a pandemic.
White sandy beaches, crystal blue water. How incredible is that? We only get one shot at making the first impression. We're here to work, or you will be gone. High maintenance charter guest.
This crew needs to step it up.
New crew, perfect storm.
This is not open!
Get back to this boat now. Suck it up, cream puff.
Set your DVR to watch new episodes of Bravo's Below Deck every Monday after 9.
Watching NBC News Now. We've got some breaking news.
Are people there concerned about what impact this could have on the election?
It's news made for your streaming world.
I'll tell you what the American people's mandate is. Heal the nation. It's why he ran. That is why he won. That is the most critical near-term issue, managing the pandemic. It does seem as if these state polls massively misled us. If it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press.
For breaking news in our changing world, download the NBC News app.
I didn't know, was my child dead? Is my child passed out?
I just kept saying, please be okay, please be okay.
You rush your child to the hospital.
A woman came in, normal clothes. We get down the hallway, and she closes the door. They were accusing me of child abuse.
And that's when the real nightmare begins.
Hey, calm down.
No, it's my children. I can't calm down.
Do No Harm, a new podcast series from NBC News and Wondery. First 2 episodes available now. Subscribe for free wherever you get your podcasts.
An election tradition that so far hasn't happened, a concession speech from President Trump. Legally, a concession speech isn't required, but right now, without one, the Biden team and the rest of the country are in limbo. Here's a look at some concession speeches from presidential races past.
If this trend does continue and he does become our next president, that he will have my wholehearted support and yours.
Congratulations on your victory. I will help you in any way that I can toward achieving a growing and better America and a secure and dignified peace.
I have done my best. I have lost. Mr. Nixon has won. The democratic process has worked its will.
It hurts too much to laugh, but I'm too old to cry.
It's